We're going to see how it pans out. I think the abrade from the board for Autumn are going to be especially key in the post-board games.
Good way to kill all these 3/3s, 3/2s, and, of course, the Witch's Oven to shut down the Cat Oven combo. And looking at these opening hands here, a pair of Priest of Forgotten Gods and a Coco, Collected Company, and, a fast start in Autumn's hand. I see that Llanowar Elf, Pelt Collector, Burning Tree Emissary, and Gruul Spellbreaker. Nice aggressive pieces with a bit of ramp.
Yeah, and here it's actually a pretty close call. The two opening lines are you can go Llanowar Elves into Burning Tree Emissary and Gruul Spellbreaker, or you can play Pelt Collector, which is a little slower. But if you draw a 2-drop with Burning Tree Emissary, that would be better, because then you get to curve out a little more nicely, essentially. But it's actually pretty close. By playing Pelt Collector here, you're hoping for a 2-drop, but at worst, you get to go Burning Tree Emissary into Llanowar.
One of my favorite personal moves is going Pelt Collector into Burning Tree Emissary into Zertal Goblin or a similar 3-power creature to get that Pelt Collector just massive on turn 2.
Drew a land, so not exactly what was there, but being on the play and getting to curve out like this is pretty much what you're hoping with the Gruul deck. So now going to just have to hope on the top of the deck to carry through, because there's no removal for Priest of Forgotten Gods and Mayhem Devil. So if Stráský has enough time to kind of unleash this Priest plus Mayhem Devil, and Woe Strider means that there's not even a need to draw another land. Priest of Forgotten Gods, Mayhem Devil, and Woe Strider do a lot of work against the board.
It is a scary hand. Looks like Autumn, she's dedicating to the full-on aggro strat here, bringing down the Gruul Spellbreaker with haste rather than a +1/+1 counter, and swinging in for 8 damage.
Yeah. This match is really a story about the die roll, to be honest. Like, whoever gets to be on the play in this match has such an advantage. Like, reverse this game where Stráský would be untapping with Priest of Forgotten Gods and Mayhem Devil, and it looks completely different to what's currently going on. And it really, post-board, it gets a little closer just because of the existence of cards like Noxious Grasp and Abrade. But pre-board, it gets hard. And this is going to be difficult because Stráský would love to have Mayhem Devil in play, but he can't really afford to just take another hit here, going down to 8, or potentially, 6 rather, since you can block the Burning Tree Emissary. But Woe Strider plus Priest of Forgotten Gods can block, sacrifice, and essentially try to go through. The problem with that is generally the Llanowar Elves is going to get picked, and you're not really developing your board that much. So if you're going for Woe Strider, there's a good chance that you're going to have to rely on Collected Company.
Yes, but a Collected Company next turn could be good. But Voltaic Brawler. Voltaic Brawler is going to enter as a 3/2, which doesn't change anything on the board this turn, but Trample is very effective against Rakdos Sacrifice. It is not a deck that has a lot of toughness.
Actually, the other thing is, I'm trying to remember Priest of the Forgotten Gods text. I don't believe you can actually activate it during Autumn's turn.
Oh, you can. There could be blockers declared. There can be a sacrifice.
Gruul Spellbreaker.
Oh, you're right. You'd have to target yourself. You don't want to be doing that.
Yeah. So
you can activate it, but you might not want to.
Right. It's not something you'd like to do. Yeah, so maybe Ondrej's plan here is to just, take the damage, hope there's not an Embercleave, and then untap with Mayhem Devil, Priest of Forgotten Gods, and try to clean up. It's going to be a little difficult with this much damage, but possible, I believe. I like trading here, though. Since you get to get rid of the free body, and you can always sacrifice the Mayhem Devil in a pinch. It doesn't maybe look that great, but you'd still get the 2 triggers off of it.
Looks like Pelt Collector going to trade with the Woe Strider here, and 5 damage still going through from the Burning Tree Emissary and the Gruul Spellbreaker, bringing Ondrej down to 5. This is not where he wants to be. And this is, again, as you mentioned, all about being on the play and on the draw. These aggro decks, they want to go fast, and the quicker they can chip down their opponent's life total, the better, especially with all these shock lands. And oftentimes I see Gruul running bottom-up runes, which you also have to pay life in order to get red mana from.
Yeah. So Stráský is going to consider the two options. I don't think there's a third option, right? The two options are really Mayhem Devil or Collected Company. There's a few considerations with how you're going to pay mana-wise for these cards, but essentially, if you played Mayhem Devil, because that's pretty straight up, we can work it out. You just sacrifice it to Priest of Forgotten Gods, make some mana. Actually, with Phyrexian Tower, something interesting you could do is...
Turn but that you don't have access to green mana.
Yeah, you're actually lacking a green mana to float 2 black mana and then kind of produce green. So yeah, just going for Collected Company here instead.
Oh, that was really a pretty good hit off Coco.
Yeah. So let's see. If you sacrifice both Mayhem Devil and Dreadhood Butcher here, you get to essentially get free ping triggers. So that gets rid of the Brawler and the Llanowar Elves, and then we see the Burning Tree Emissary go away, most likely.
I think that it is a lower value target than the Spellbreaker, definitely something that Autumn would prioritize getting rid of. And there's also going to be a card drawn and 2 mana generated here, and that is actually a blocker, Priest of Forgotten Gods, if it needs to be. Or there could be a shock in here for that Mayhem Devil to come down, but going down to 3 life against Gruul is a risky play indeed.
Yeah. The consideration would be also, though, that there's not actually that much that can just straight up kill the Mayhem Devil. So that's the consideration, is that you're still not dying to the card shock, essentially, which would be Stomp from Bone Crusher Giant.
It would be all about those hasters, and there was not a hasty creature drawn.
Yep. Yeah, right. You weren't worried about Embercleave because there weren't enough cards there. You were worried. This is where the Ancrop Crusher that we were alluding to.
Oh my gosh, Ancrop Crusher would have just closed this game.
Yeah. So Autumn going for it. You kind of have to trade, and I like this. It doesn't look good, right? You're like essentially giving up the last creature you have on board. The truth of the matter is that Mayhem Devil is not something you can beat, and it gives Ondrej access to way too many options. Now, of course, there's another one. So we have the third Mayhem Devil. It's very good.
That is some good draws for Ondrej. Honey getting the sweet pulls.
Yeah, considering deploying that Priest of Forgotten Gods, but going down to 1 is a very different beast than going down to than staying at 3.
And Priest of Forgotten Gods swinging in, not even going to bother keeping it back because we're going to see a sacrifice with the Phyrexian Tower and using that 2 mana to play the other copy of Priest of Forgotten Gods.
Yeah, so a consideration there that Autumn's last card in hand might have been a Collected Company. So this way, if the card stock in Autumn's hand was Collected Company, this might, essentially stop. That's why you saw the Llanowar Elves essentially get taken down.
And we saw Autumn play Gallia here. This is a creature with haste. It's a 2/2 that if you attack with 3 or more creatures, you have the option to discard a card and draw 2. And that is a discard at random. But this is just Gallia sitting on the battlefield. Looks like a sacrifice target or maybe a target for Mayhem Devil pings. I'm interested in why it didn't get held back. Maybe just a manner of mana. You can't play too many cards off only 4 mana.
Yeah, if it attacked, it essentially would have just traded cards. And I think Autumn just prioritized having at least some kind of body on the battlefield. But the fact that this Woe Strider escapes means that the 2/2 body is probably going to be irrelevant. We might see Priest of Forgotten Gods activated right away just because of access to Witch's Oven in hand.
Mayhem Devil swinging in. That's the 3 damage. And Burning Tree Emissary, another 2/2. It does generate mana on enter the battlefield, but there's nowhere to use this mana right now.
Yeah. I think in the end, because this game is looking like it's swinging out, I'm trying to find how Autumn can win this game and kind of coming up blank, especially because Witch's Oven can gain life in a pinch, right? You get to sacrifice the creature and you do get a food token. And this is a lot of power on the battlefield plus a lot of ways to deal with anything. So I think we're going to go to the post-board games, but this came down really to that key collected company. Really getting that Mayhem Devil and the Dreadhood Butcher, almost all of it was necessary. And then Autumn kind of not drawing Embercleave on time, not drawing Collected Company. So, I think that's kind of what you need in these games when one player's on the play, is essentially having to catch up, really overpower. And that's what ended up happening here.
Nope. Now Ondrej even has Gigantha in hand and the 5 mana to play it. There's a 5/5 hitting the battlefield. The game could be over next turn. Scavenging Ooze. It can get a little bigger, can gain a little bit of life, but it's no contest here.
Yeah, I mean, Autumn can go up to 11, but this 4/4 can easily be dealt with thanks to the Priest of Forgotten Gods in hand. I'm actually trying to think if it's lethal next turn. So 11. So if you sacrifice the Priest in hand plus the Mayhem Devil in play, that's 4. So it's not quite lethal. Not looking good, though.
If another small creature is drawn, though, that will clear the way. And that is not a small creature. That's a Mayhem Devil.
Yeah,
this game is over. I'm very sorry, Autumn, but we're going to go into game 2 once this turns over.
Yeah,
and the Scavenging Ooze is just looking for a final snack before it's sacrificed. Yeah. Mayhem Devil, of course, doesn't care which player is sacrificing a creature. If you sacrifice a creature, a permanent, anything, Mayhem Devil is very interested and does some damage.
As many owners of Fabled Passage know, it doesn't care where that Fabled Passage came from.
I have had to sacrifice a couple Llanowar Elves to Fabled Passage cracks before.
You do what you have to do.
You do what you have to do, and what you have to do is die. So we're seeing Autumn, unfortunately, losing match 1. I was rooting for her, but, there's still the potential to come back.
Right, yeah. And I like this, that we're going to be able to see Sidewing live. So taking out the cards, post-board matchups are not so much about speed, they're more about resilience. So that's why you see Llanowar come out. You're going to see probably Gallia come out, just because it's not a very strong body in a matchup like this. And you have already access to a lot of decent 2-drops. The Abrades are obviously stellar. We don't actually see Redcap Melee come in, because the only creature you can kind of get with that is Mayhem Devil, which is a key creature. But it's a little marginal. What I enjoy as well, looking from Stráský's side, is look at these copies of Dreadhood Butcher that came out. Essentially, you're on the draw, so that card is much worse than it normally would be. A little surprised to not see the full free copies of Noxious Grasp come in. I am guessing that Stráský is considering what to make as a change, since that card looks really good in this matchup. Also, we don't see Korvald Faker's Kin come in, maybe because of respect to the Akroan War. I think Redcap Melee is one thing, but getting Korvald hit by the Akroan War is such a problem.
Oh, yeah, that can lose the game, because neither deck has very good aerial defenses. It's pretty much, hey, who has the big flyer? It's me. I stole it with my Saga. I also saw that Autumn brought in another copy of Clothes. So we get to see the God of Destiny.
It's relatively decent against the Jund Sacrifice decks. But I found this interesting, that in the end, there's no Redcap Melee, there's no the Akroan War, so Stráský was respecting maybe cards that didn't get boarded in. The other angle is that it is a 5-mana card, and you're generally going to win games of Magic that play out normally with Sacrifice versus Gruul, so all you're trying to do is just be consistent. So a 5-mana card may not be what's necessary.
So Autumn got a fast start with this deck. Nothing on turn 1, but turn 2, a Burning Tree Emissary into Voltaic Brawler. Burning Tree Emissary was only recently unsuspended, which really helped Gruul get back into the game, being this kind of mana converter as well. I've used it for fixing a couple times on turn 2. And turn 3, if there's a land drawn, we could see Ferocidon, we could see a Bone Crusher Giant, or we've got Stomps and Abrades on 2 mana.
Yeah, Autumn has access to a lot of options, but it's going to be very much one spell a turn. Stráský already has access to Claim the Firstborn and Witch's Oven, so there'll be potentially a few double spell turns for Stráský here. There's kind of two options this turn. You can either go Claim the Firstborn plus Witch's Oven, but ideally you'd want to deploy that with synergy, so having something like Mayhem Devil in play, or a second thing, or essentially a Woe Strider to give you different synergy. The other thing is you can just have Abrade, and Abrade is a 2-mana card, so you might as well use the one card that costs the most here. Kind of like this choice of using the Abrade rather than Claim the Firstborn that could be more powerful down the line.
Abrade, of course, waiting for that Voltaic Brawler to use up an energy counter, so there are fewer of them left. And here's a Shattered Skull Smashing, shocking in for 3. I guess bolting in. Now, I love Ferocidon in this matchup. It is going to be, unfortunately, sacrificed here, but I do really like Ferocidon because it negates a lot of the value from the Cat Oven cycle. Means that they're taking damage rather than gaining life with each of those cycles.
But by the way, look at how good Claim the Firstborn is with Phyrexian Tower.
Sacrifice that poor dinosaur and turn it into 2 black mana.
And what's nice about this is that while Autumn has an answer to Woe Strider, the GOAT is still around. So that's, again, more mana from Phyrexian Tower. I don't think we'll see that used this turn just because Stráský kind of doesn't need 5 mana specifically. But it could be useful down the line.
Also gets a sacrifice trigger for that Mayhem Devil. Now we've got a Witch's Oven and a Woe Strider coming down, 2 sacrifice outlets.
Yeah. And this makes the Stomp in hand much worse because if you target Woe Strider, Stráský can just sacrifice it to Witch's Oven, which means that there won't be a Bone Crusher Giant to be played later. While there's not a land for Collected Company, I'll point out how good that card is in the post-board games. Pre-board, it's a little less good because you need to be faster, and it can get you the wrong creatures. Whereas post-board, the games get grindier, and the card's more relevant. So when you hit a Collected Company, you get something that's a little more potent. Of course, there's less chances since both players board in more spells, but it's still one of the more potent cards in the matchup. And if you're an Autumn fan, probably the card to keep an eye out on.
I'd love to see a good Coco happen during this game.
I mean, I saw Stráský's Coco. That was a good Coco.
Yeah, but I want to see Autumn, get an even better one. Maybe a pair of Spellbreakers. That's always a powerhouse.
Yeah. While we get into more turns, I do want to point out that I really like Autumn's build of Gruul. It's just that it's a little more designed for Assault Eye Field. And there was, I think Autumn mentioned that there was probably more sacrifice than was expected, but playing Voltaic Brawlers when people are edging for the mirror matches and cutting their fatal pushes is really a good move. Just didn't pan out that way, but I really like the approach for sure.
Because this is the first round of the day, we didn't really have a chance to talk about what the meta is for this league, for the MPL over this league weekend. It's 33% Sultai, 25% Jund, 20% Gruul, and then a bunch of one-of decks, some of which are variants on those other decks, like the 4-color Sultai plus Yasharn deck.
By the way, I like this Autumn not deploying a land to kind of take Stomp out of Stráský's mind potentially, so that the Witch's Oven might get used over the Woe Strider. And making sure to get rid of Mayhem Devil now. Not later, now.
Goodbye, Mayhem Devil.
Yeah.
And of course, the other target for that Abrade it's always worth considering the Oven, but without a cat out, it is not as scary.
No, and Mayhem Devil is probably one of the scarier cards if you're a
Oh my gosh. Yeah, especially when you have 1 and 2 toughness creatures. The Mayhem Devil can wipe the board.
Yeah. The one thing I was actually a little surprised by here is that Stráský decided not to sacrifice a goat to take out the Burning Tree Emissary. Essentially decided, no, I'm not going to trade my 0-1 for your 2-2, which surprised me a little, but probably indicates how much value Stráský is putting on this Priest of Forgotten Gods.
Next turn, that priest would be able to sacrifice those 2 goats, but looks like the Bone Crusher Giant isn't having any of that. We're going to see Stomp cast on Priest of Forgotten Gods. And now this priest is probably going to be sacrificed to Witch's Oven. And the big reason for that is not just to get the value off the food token. It actually causes the Bone Crusher Giant to not be exiled. Instead, the entire card doesn't resolve. There was no valid target, and it goes to the graveyard.
Yeah, and it indicates a lot as to how Autumn values card advantage in this matchup, because you used it right away. You were fine with not tapping out the Witch's Oven. You just did not want an activation from Priest. So didn't even try to tap the Witch's Oven on Stráský's turn. It was just, look, I really need to get rid of this Priest because losing the 2-2 and you drawing a card is not an acceptable scenario.
All right, and here is Autumn casting Collected Company. Only hitting 1 card off of it, but that is a nice card to get. I love Klothys in this matchup because of the little bit of graveyard exile that it causes. But there's nothing left in Ondrej's graveyard here because they were all used to escape the Woe Strider.
Yeah.
You can always exile from your own graveyard, which is a good source of damage, and occasionally ramp.
Yeah. I was going to point out, though, this is really unfortunate for Autumn. First, not hitting a second creature on Collected Company. And then the point that Stráský has Scavenging Ooze in hand. So whatever Autumn targets, Scavenging Ooze will eat and prevent Klothys' ability. Most likely.
Woe Strider swinging in. 5 damage when you're at 11 is a sizable hit.
Yep. I mean, you start to see the problem from Stomping Grounds and Shatter Skull. That's a lot of damage that adds up over time. And yeah, you can see Autumn's reaction to that Scavenging Ooze, because one of Autumn's best chances in this game was Klothys, and that just got completely crushed by the Scavenging Ooze. I mean, yeah, you're going to target the Woe Strider so it doesn't come back, but it's just going to make the Scavenging Ooze into a free.
Yep. Ondrej Stráský gaining 1 life, exiling the Woe Strider from the graveyard, and stopping Klothys. If there was 1 more mana, then we could have seen 2 creatures come down for Autumn. And that would have meant that Klothys would have actually changed from being just an enchantment to being an enchantment creature. And she'd be able to swing in. This being one of the Theros Beyond Death gods, it's an indestructible creature when that devotion requirement is met.
Yeah. I'll point out that this deck is more likely to make Klothys into a creature, and a dynamic we're unlikely to see in this game, but that can happen in this matchup, is sometimes you deliberately don't want Klothys to be a creature, because then it gets targeted by Claim the Firstborn, and being indestructible doesn't stop you from getting sacrificed.
Scavenging Ooze getting even bigger. There's still some fuel left in the graveyard to make this ooze larger than anything else on the board. The Gruul Spellraker does have a +1/+1 counter from Riot, but we saw a quick check of Autumn's graveyard. There are still creatures in there, which means the Scavenging Ooze could get bigger.
Yeah, and more specifically, there are free creatures in there. So with access to free green mana, Stráský has essentially a leasehold Scavenging Ooze that could turn into a 7/7, so you can't even double block to trade with it. Kind of forced to do this. Chump block the Scavenging Ooze with the Emissary, trade with the Woe Strider, but it's this Scavenging Ooze is going to be really hard for Autumn to deal with. And at 6 life, it's going to not just outsize anything Autumn has, but Autumn just doesn't have the time to deploy enough cards to kind of combat it.
So we saw a target on a non-creature here, which means that the Scavenging Ooze will not gain life or get a +1/+1 counter on the exile. I think that was very intentional by Autumn. since there is a Woe Strider in Ondrej's graveyard, which could have been targeted instead. So Burning Tree Emissary going to generate 2 mana when it enters the battlefield, which can be used to chain together another card. So we're going to see Gruul Spellbreaker coming down with a +1/+1 counter.
Yeah. I do want to point out that something here is that Autumn, is keeping her cool here. In a spot like this, I see a lot of people just give up. But that little thing, right? The Clofist targeting the non-creature is correct. That's what you should be doing. You could also target Stráský's Woe Strider, but there's not enough cards to escape. And it's good to just try to play the magic you can at all times in a league like this, because even if this game likely won't be in Autumn's favor, you still have to play other matches and you still have to stay focused. And look, you never know. You could draw Collected Company into the best possible thing. Stráský's could be flooding out horribly, and then maybe you can take over.
This is anything but a flood, though, for Ondrej. We just saw a Gilded Goose and a Priest of Forgotten Gods come down.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Embercleave is pretty much an unplayable card here. So with Priest of Forgotten
Gods, not enough creatures. They're not attacking in.
Nope. Right. And this is a big part why it's so hard for the Gruul deck to win against Jund Sacrifice is at some point you just don't have the board presence. It's not just that they're playing removal. The removal part is actually not the problem. The problem is that their removal is in the form of creatures. So they have board presence and it makes it much harder.
And Autumn conceding the second game of the match. And the win goes to Ondrej Stráský. Congratulations, Ondrej, getting a win in round 7 of the league weekend.